Bienvenidos a este stream de Tan Grande y Jugando. Hoy tenemos una invitada muy especial, por eso esta conferencia va a ser realizada en inglés. Específicamente vamos a tener con nosotros a Charly Harbord, quien está justamente aquí presente, pero adicionalmente les tengo un montón de invitados hoy, y es que está con nosotros Sara, está con nosotros Andy, que hacen parte del equipo de voluntarios de este jam. Y eso es justamente súper importante. ¿Cómo está en equipo?
Muy bien, Sandra, gracias.
Bien, feliz de estar acá.
¿Cómo está en equipo?
Bueno, ¿me escuchas? Muy bien.
Te escuchamos muy bien. Tenemos un poquito de delay al parecer, pero no hay problema, posiblemente es mi internet. Sin embargo, tenemos con nosotros 2 personas más en el equipo con el interés de que podamos hacer esta charla muchísimo más interesante. Recuerden que la vamos a tener en inglés. So, from this moment, we're going to talk in English because we have an English speaker guest for today's interview. So, how are you, Charly?
Hot and sunny here in Scotland, which is exciting. Not as hot as Colombia, though, I imagine.
Well, we're in Bogota, as if you can see, in my sweater here. Like, it is really cold.
Yeah, so that's up for debate, actually.
Yeah. I think we're 20 degrees. That's very hot for us people here. So.
Envy. Okay. So we're already streamed in all of our platforms. So we're really glad to see you here. Well, Charly is like a really important guest that we're going to have for this Women Game Jam, and she is the kind of person that has a lot of experience and that you don't think is important for the video game, but it is so much important. So, Charly, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you?
Okay, so I have a very long and interesting background. So I'm originally from the northeast of Scotland, a tiny little farming village, and it was small, and the only thing we could do was to play games. I moved to China with my son, who was 6 at the time, and learnt Chinese and started doing game localization. And from learning Chinese and teaching English, I moved back to Scotland. Being an avid gamer, I ended up being lucky enough to work for Abertay University and study a PhD with a focus on language and role-playing games, so second language acquisition. But I've got some slides I'll show you about that in a bit. Oh.
Sorry, just me. So we're really excited to hear a little bit more about you. I don't know if my team would like to ask you something before we start now.
No, I think I'm really pumped up for hearing you speak. As I was saying before, I am your fan. I really like your work. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to listen to whatever you have to say.
I'm very happy to be here, definitely. So.
Yes, I also read some of your articles. I found them so interesting. They're so easy to read, and I would even recommend them to non-academic people. So they're really good.
Yeah, that's what the whole point of language is that I have an idea and I can communicate it to you. It doesn't need to be academic or above your head. If I can get my idea to you and you can understand it, then we're communicating. And I think academic articles should be that way as well. Anyone who's interested but not an expert should be able to read them. Otherwise, what are you writing for?
You're a little advanced in my questions, because that was the part of the important part that we need to think about in the Colombian video game industry and the Latin American industry is just that, to make investigations and papers about video games. And so we can think about what we are doing, not just like an art, but also something that it is also scientific. It is also about investigation. It is also so. Charly, we're all ears. We're going to shut up now, and we want to see you shine, please.
Okay, right. So I'm just going to share my screen.
Wow.
Just 1 second. These things are never easy. Right. Okay. Can you see that?
No, you haven't shared your screen yet.
It's not shared. It was. Hang on. We'll try again.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we have.
Excellent. So this is just a short introduction, background, introduction to my work, and sort of future things that I'm doing. So, Charly Harbord. So, my focus is games and language, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, this is where I grew up. It's northeast of Scotland. It's a place called Tullynestle. You can notice that there are no people. This is typical of where I live. Scotland only has about 5 million people living there, but we all have our own accents. We even have our own languages. So, for example, where I lived, we spoke Doric. So it's a lot of farmland. What we do have is Island Coos, which is special cow from Scotland. They're very, very, very cute and very big, but also, probably more than there are people. I moved to Fuzhou in southeast China. Now, this is a small city in China, so only 12 million people, which, if you remember, Scotland's only got 5 million. 12 million was a big, big culture shock. And it's very, very modern, very built up. It was a big change for me. But they have, as you can see here, traditional ancient Chinese style McDonald's. And they still preserved a lot of their culture. And so culture and language are two of the aspects that I am really passionate about, because a person's culture and identity comes from their language and the culture of where they live, but also where they identify as home. So it was there I started working for IGG in Fuzhou, and I did localization for games. These are two games that I worked on: Angels Online and Tales of Pirates. Tales of Pirates now isn't made anymore, but Angels Online is still going strong. It was a lot of hard work, but really enjoyable, and I don't necessarily play these games myself, but changing the language was really, really interesting. So as you can see here, this is an example of like text localization. We'd be given the text in Chinese and we'd change it to English. Or sometimes they would have in-house translators to change it to English from Chinese. But then we'd need to go through and work on it. So for example, increased damage for anti-Buddha. It doesn't make a lot of sense in English. So you then need to localize the text. So localization in terms of cultural localization, so that it fits with the culture that's going to be playing the game. It's not nearly as interesting as you think doing this. It's long, page after page on Excel sheets, but there was reward in. So this, after being in China for 8 years, learning Mandarin and learning Chinese culture, everything like that, we came back to Scotland. We spent a year in Italy before, and I came to Dundee to work and study at Aberdeen University. So this is Dundee right here. It's next to the North Sea. It's very cold. And this is where I grew up, little farming village up in the sort of border of the Highlands. Scotland's a very beautiful country, perfect environment. not many people, as I said. But what's special about Scotland is Dundee, and what's special about Dundee is our games and our games education. Abertay University is ranked one of the top in the world for games education. So I'm really, really lucky to have been working there. So this is our university. It's only three main buildings. It's very small, but it's excellent. And so I work in the School of Design and Informatics, where we do cybersecurity, games design, professional masters, all kinds of really cool game programs. So when I first started there, I worked on a program called the MPOP, which is the Masters in Professional Portfolio Orientation Program. So this was a thing we set up with Perfect World in China. So Abertay joined links with Perfect World. They set up a new school, and we did the MPOP, which was a preparation module to take students from China directly onto our professional masters in Dundee. I worked on the English side of this, but working closely with the games department meant that we were learning not just about how to improve English language, but subject specific language and also culturally specific language. So the kind of language and conversations that you would have in a game studio as opposed to a business or as opposed to a coffee shop. There's different styles of language, and this was where I first started out there. So far, we've had 6 or 7 runs of this, and it's been pretty successful. However, who am I? I am in-game project coordinator for a Shanghai project that Abertay University runs, where I look at the Chinese side of research and translate. I am the applied games designer for Women in Games for the upcoming conference, which is a huge honor. I've got a chapter in a real book that is coming out in April. They'll be flying off the shelves, I'm sure. A chapter in this book, Digital Games and Language Learning. If you're interested in the application of games for language, this is the book for you. This is part of my research. So I've looked at avatars and the other side of Proteus's mirror. So the Proteus effect is how people change or adapt their personality to suit the avatar that they are using. Whereas I wanted to look on the other side of that, as in, how will I change and adapt my behavior based on your avatar when we're interacting within a game? And I have a chapter in this, a paper in this journal. So I've been productive, and I'm so lucky that I've had the supervisors for my PhD that I've had that are supportive and never tell me no, but just tell me how can we do it, and that's really important. So my PhD is the use of interactive role-playing games for the mutual enhancement of English and Mandarin. So the first question, why choose role-playing games for language learning? And I had several inspirations for this. So the first inspiration is there's no forum to practice a foreign language in your own country. So for example, some of you guys are in Bogota, you're all over the world. If I teach you restaurant English, could you go to a local restaurant to use that English? And the answer is probably no. So how can you practice the language that you learn? And language should be about language for use, not memorization of dictionaries. My son is now 20, but at the time when we lived in China, I bought him a 3DS when they first came out. Unfortunately, I bought him one that was regionally locked for Japan, and this meant that he could only play Japanese games on it. I thought this would be a big issue, but it turned out it wasn't a problem at all. And within a few months, my son was able to read Japanese and to understand game Japanese because he wanted to play the games. And so he learned it almost as a byproduct of playing a game. And that really intrigued me that if something you're doing is fun, the learning is almost, you don't feel like you're doing it. Teaching in China, the difference between the language that the students produced in the classroom and then the language that the students produced whilst playing online games, there was a huge difference between the level of English, but also how they didn't have to think very hard when they were speaking when playing games, whereas in the classroom you could see they were taking a long time to think before they were speaking. So it kind of made me think that maybe the idea of playing a game and being in the moment, the immersion of a game, actually can help you get rid of your fear of making a mistake when you're speaking a language. Mutual language exchange, like I said before, I teach you restaurant English in your native country, you may find it hard to practice that, or to have a real conversation with someone in a target language. So with a role-playing game, an MMORPG, something like that, you're actually in the moment. You're chatting in-game text or in-game speech. You're talking to people. And then this is a personal issue. So dyslexia in Mandarin. As being a Mandarin Chinese teacher, I noticed that some very dyslexic students that I had didn't display any of the issues they had in English when they used Mandarin. Now, part of this is because Mandarin uses pictures, in essence, for words. Symbols are words. So it's processed by a different area of the brain, which means it sort of bypasses or even negates the areas that would cause trouble with English. My son has dyslexia, I have dyslexia, so this is really interesting for me. And this is my baby boy eating a pizza and not being happy at being the inspiration for my PhD. So we're talking about role-playing games for language. So obviously the first thing you'd look at is serious games. And so this is a nice cross pie chart. You've got learning games, simulation games, and then training, edutainment, simulation. And serious games sort of sits in the middle. The problem with serious games is they tend to be educational first and then entertaining second. And why I say this is a problem is in a classroom, a student is bound to want to play the learning game instead of opening a textbook. But would they go home and play that game? And the answer generally is not often. So I wanted to change this. I wanted to be entertaining and then educational second or at the same level. A good game has a balance between formal and informal learning. Like I said, where you don't realize you're learning, it just happens. And also the inclusion of both individual and social learning environments. So it's something you can study on your own, but there's a level of interactivity, and it's the interactivity that helps people to learn and to progress and to actually enjoy their experience. So PhD hypothesis questions, this is the meat of what I'm studying. Can games and education be effectively combined? What I mean by this is, can we make a game that is also educational but fun, and fun and education on equal portions? Does the effect of using an avatar help with shyness in speaking in game? So we've all been in a language class when someone's asked you a question and you're reluctant to speak because maybe you think your language isn't good enough yet. Does using an avatar, making you faceless, does that help with willingness to communicate within a game? And then part of my research, does the other player's avatar ease your interaction in the target language? So am I more likely to talk to you depending on what your avatar looks like? And so I did a wee bit of research on that, which I'm just about to talk about. And if I'm a target language learner, will I experience higher levels of motivation for learning a language by playing a role-playing game as opposed to using a book? And then my passion part, will the signifiers of dyslexia that are shown through reading and writing not present when compared to English LT players? So dyslexia, there is Chinese dyslexia and there's English dyslexia. They're not the same thing at all. So you can be dyslexic in one language but not another, or not at all. And so how does using English versus Mandarin, how does that present itself, or not, dyslexia not present itself? So that's something that I'm looking into as well. So for avatars, I designed these 16 avatars that you can see here. Some culturally representative, some just made up, some fantasy. These two are what we would say are Celtic, that, you know, Irish, Scottish looking. And I asked some participants, most of whom were male Chinese students on the MPOP where I worked in Beijing, which of these avatars, so I asked them 3 questions. Which avatar they would choose for themselves if they were speaking a second language in a game? Which would they feel comfortable speaking with? And which would they feel uncomfortable speaking with? So if we go back, you can see there's a whole range here. And so after exposure to these, or looking at these, they had to choose who they would want to represent themselves. So if it's a Chinese player, they would be playing an English game. So if you're going to play this role-playing game in English, which of these guys are you going to pick? And which you're playing the game in English, who would you want to talk to, who would you not want to talk to, or feel less comfortable or confident speaking to? So the most popular choice. So the Chinese male students, majority male, chose these 3 as their most popular for themselves. Reasoning was the boy looks most like me, so they identified. Ironically, this is the one that looks almost exactly like my son, and I didn't realize until after. And then they picked the Scottish girl. Then who would you like to interact with? The pretty blonde girl, the Scottish girl, the Scottish boy. Now, the interesting thing here is that the students knew that whilst all their answers were anonymous, I'm Scottish. So I think maybe these 2 were chosen, the Scottish boy and the Scottish girl were maybe chosen in order to make me happy and give them a higher grade. Didn't happen.
Yeah, okay.
Cheeky. And then who they would not feel comfortable interacting with. And the reasons were given that they were purely aesthetic and were not used to. This one in particular, the grey alien, was the number one that was really not wanted to interact with, because they felt it was so unidentifiable. So this proved to be quite interesting for me. Now,
oh well, and also you have. Can you turn to the slide before, because you have the male, and well, you have this redhead male that you want to interact, and also you have him as I don't want to interact with him. That is really curious.
yes, no, that was an interesting one.
Happened 2 times.
They would want to interact with him because he's Scottish and he's like the target language. But then they said they didn't want to because they've never seen anyone like that. And it was purely on the aesthetics. But the number,
And
yeah, it was a very odd
and
one.
the female with the dark skin, but what they say about her?
Her with the blonde hair.
It's a hair.
Yeah.
No?
So the blonde hair and the pink top. Uh, she was the number one. Oh,
no,
The female with the
the
blonde
female
skin.
in the last time, she's
this one, yeah. They just, yeah. There was these two were just a few people had chosen these. This one was significantly, the gray alien was significantly higher than all the others, and I think it was just because they don't see people like this. Um, China is very monoculture. So even in
yeah,
Beijing, the majority of people are
and
Chinese,
monoracial.
Chinese. And
Mm.
so it was just the aesthetics of we don't see people like this. The same with the red-headed girl, but they knew she was Scottish, so they wanted to pick her because
And
they thought that would make
also because she's female, so it's maybe easier because she's female.
yeah. But then they also chose her to for themselves as an avatar.
Yeah.
They would like to play as the Scottish girl. But the American girl was the number one because she or American looking girl because she's so pretty and friendly and because she's got such a nice smile. People might want to play with me or interact with me more as an avatar. And here, the alien that was chosen was because for themselves, because this way no one would be able to tell where the player is from, because there's nothing culturally identifiable about them,
The anonymity.
which is
How do you say that word? Anonymity.
that's also why it was
Anonymous.
chosen for they didn't want to interact with the alien because it looked strange, but also they knew that they would pick that character for themselves so that no one knew where they came from, and they assumed the person who picked that for themselves would be the same. So it's almost how honestly you represent yourself in a game will influence how honestly you think other people's avatars are represented within their game. So there was a lot of interesting points came up from this very small part of research, but it actually is part of my bigger research project. So I wanted to make a role playing game. Now, workaround is one of the most important phrases that I've heard ever within the games education, games industry, anything. Nothing off the shelf fitted my exact needs. There was nothing that I could pick up and play or download that would work perfectly for me. So I chose to use RPG Maker MV to create the RPG that reflected the language that I needed to put in. Now, I'm not a coder. I cannot code. I can draw a little, but so to use Unity or something like that is way beyond what I'm able to do just now. RPG Maker is good. It's kind of plug and play. There are a lot of really good tutorials, and within a day or two, you can have something playable, which is pretty cool. However, RPG Maker is single person. Now, part of my research is collaboration. So a workaround was needed, a way to make this suitable for what I wanted. And the only way I could think of doing it was to make the same game twice. I made the game once in English, or I'm making the game once in English and once in Mandarin. And there's a blog that goes between the two games so people can play them in different parts of the world and then interact within a blog using text. The language that I'm using, there's an exam, a Chinese equivalency exam called Hanyu Shraping Kaosher, which is HSK. And so it's kind of the equivalent of IELTS or TOEFL. And so the level one words is 150 words. That's what I'm using for the Chinese. And the equivalent of that is the Cambridge English test. And so I'm using those for the English words. So it's very basic, it's beginner stuff at the minute. So this is a look at RPG Maker MV. It's very top down. You can make dungeon explorers. You can use the installed backgrounds or installed environments. You can create your own environments. You can modify your avatars. It's for someone who's not a coder and doesn't have the time or ability to do that. It's great. So what I did here, we've got the English and we've got the Mandarin version. So it's exactly the same, but you can see here, how are you? Ni hao ma? Not good. Wuha. So this is exactly the same, just in a different target language. But through using the research from the Avatar paper, what I've done now, sorry, that's not very clear, but the new avatars are in there. So, the Chinese people said they would like to interact with this particular avatar. So here she is in the game now. The English speaking Mandarin learners that I taught that did the research, took part in the research as well, had selected the Chinese lady or Asian looking lady, saying that they want to interact with her because she's very pretty. Interestingly, the Chinese boys said she wasn't pretty at all. But so you can see these are the only differences between the two games. Yeah. So that's basically what I'm up to just now. I've been working on willingness to communicate, and also pushing ahead with the game making and more research. I took time to do a bit of art. My friend's making a game, so I've had a shot at making assets for his game, as you can see here. Quite proud of this one, although he didn't want stones, which is a shame. But this is one part that I wanted to make really important for everyone, that whenever someone asks you, can you do this, or do you want to try, or do you want to have a shot or have a go at doing something, always say yes. You don't know if you can do it or not, but by trying is the only way to find out. I've never done computer art before. I'm quite happy. They're very novice, but always give something a try. Take every opportunity. And so, speaking of taking opportunities, this is the Women in Games Global Digital Conference that's coming up, and I'm the applied games designer for this conference, which, if I hadn't had the guts to apply for, even though I felt, there's going to be people better than me, but I was lucky enough to get the position, and it's great. So hopefully we'll see you at the conference as well. But that's all I've got for presentation. So feel free to ask any questions.
We're really excited. Yeah.
Is that okay?
What would you like to ask, Sarah? You're like there, like with your microphone. So.
Well, I have several questions. I don't know if we can have also some questions in our chat, but for now, I'm going to ask some things. So, my first question, I was really interested about what you were saying about dyslexia. That was really surprising because I really didn't think that maybe different approaches to teaching or to learning would maybe make those problems less noticeable or even bypass them. So, do you think there's a real potential for games to be used in order to students to maybe overcome those dyslexia developmental issues, maybe, or learning issues?
Yeah, and I've seen it myself with students that have. So basically, it's a different gyre, so it's a different area of your brain that processes pictures from writing, and so there's a lot of research that's been done with MRI scanners, and you can see different parts of the brain being lit up when it's being used. Now, I'm not saying learn Mandarin and your dyslexia will go away, because that's nonsense. But the knock-on effect from the knock-on effect for suddenly being good at something, being able to do something, is huge. And then that confidence does spill over into other things. And I think, the written word isn't necessarily the only way to communicate. And instead of knocking someone down or someone constantly comparing themselves to others for what they can or can't do, if you can find a way to channel what you can do, that's always good. Everyone's good at something.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, definitely, I think Mandarin is. I mean, most pictographic languages, so it would apply for Arabic or Japanese. Just that Mandarin is the one that I know about, um, and I think yeah. So I have dyscalculia, which is like I guess number dyslexia.
Yeah.
And so when I look at numbers, numbers move around. So I could see 51, but it could be the number 15. And I'm reasonably smart, but this actually happens. But if I write the numbers in Chinese characters, I don't have the same issue, which is really weird. It's all about how the brain processes. It's way, way beyond me, but I think it's something we can definitely tap into.
Do you know of any? Do you have any good experiences with meeting the end of a game designer and somebody like some academic or some teacher in a language school, for instance? Because when developing this kind of serious games, there's always this disconnect
Mm-hmm.
of those teachers trying to do something very traditional,
Yeah,
but they really know how to teach those kind of things. But game designers know how to make a fun game, but perhaps they
yeah.
don't focus so much on the lessons themselves.
No, absolutely. That's a great question, and that's part of my whole research is that um, you can have. It seems you've got two fields. You've got a game that is fun, and you've got an educational game. We have something called First in Maths here in Scotland, and kids will play it in the classroom because it's better than having a maths lesson. But they wouldn't play it at home. It's not fun. It's basically just maths. So I think an understanding with games, psychology is so closely involved in it, and sociology as well. And getting that connection instead of it just being, um, I'm going to make a game, I want to make money, the kind of social implications or enhancements that you can have. So we do a lot of work, particularly in our university. So the students make serious games. So games for, I think someone did one on training nurses to take blood because you have to refresh that. And it used to be just like a really boring tick box thing. So they made a game for that. And we're always looking at innovative ways to get games into the classroom or into the home to learn. And especially now that the world just about ended this year with COVID and everything, everyone is in front of their laptops all the time, and kids need to learn. And if they can have fun doing it, they will learn more and they will learn happily as opposed to being forced. So there's a lot of research in that area just now, a lot.
Okay,
Yeah,
fun.
that was a question I was maybe gonna make since we are in the midst of a pandemic and there has been a shift in educational in classrooms, in schools, in universities, and in
Hmm.
educational environments around virtuality, around how to make things work now that we are on our computers. And I
Hmm.
think this kind of educational games, this kind of interactive experiences can be really helpful to that end, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
what do you think teachers could do? Because normally teachers do not have a lot of knowledge about how to make a game, about how to make an RPG. But
Yeah.
what can they do right now to maybe do
Okay.
some
So
gamification in games?
yeah, I mean, first off, I knew nothing at all about making a game. I just it was just an idea that I had, and so the game will be a long time before the game is ready, but it's ready to test the four levels in both languages, and that was just by finding a recommended game maker that didn't need coding, that has a whole slew of YouTube tutorials. Each tutorial is only about 5 minutes long. It's some random dude that I follow who gave me all the tips for using it. And that's one way to do it. There's so many online games companies that are offering these services, but also um, the sort of I know for us like BBC and other educational places have put out educational games as well.
I'm so excited. I'm a little envious, but I would like to ask you a little bit about more of that state of play that you have there, because you're always training in video games, and that's something that in our region we don't have that type of information. So,
Mhm.
what can we do as a game development society to encourage the video games inside our institutions? So we have, as you said, training for nurses video game system,
Mhm.
but the better of all, as you told before, first of math, first in math is
Yeah.
the campaign. That what is that? How we can do that? How we can empower our society to go to the next level?
Hmm. So, education is always the key, and also I think in this particular period that we're all learning to cope with, it's actually much easier, which is ironic, but because, for example, parents didn't want their kids on laptops, they didn't want them playing games. Now, well, yes, it's educational, do it, play games. You can't go and socialize with your friends, but you can be anti-socially social, which is, you're staying in your house, but you're still socializing with your friends. And I think looking at how we can not necessarily make new games, and I think this comes back to what Sarah was saying, it's not necessarily about designing and making your own game. How can you adapt a game that's already in existence for an educational purpose? So, for example, Sims. If I set a, a task list in English, you could play The Sims. They only speak Simlish anyway, but you would have to follow the instructions in English, and that would be learning. Minecraft is being used for a lot of research just now. One of my friends in the University of Hawaii, which is wonderful, she does a lot of research based on Minecraft and task-based opportunities, so that they're given tasks, cooperative, collaborative tasks in English. So you don't need to be a games designer. You just need to be able to think outside of the box. And you need to, I think, most importantly, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's learning. Would you enjoy doing this? And if you think, no, that'd be really boring, then what do you think a kid's going to feel like? You know, we, it's all about bringing the fun back, I think.
We have a question in chat that ties to what you're saying. Jesus Orlando Berserker asks, have you seen a game called Shujinko? Recently, I read about that, an action game to learn Japanese. And do you know any other games for learning
Okay,
Chinese?
so thank you, Jesus. I had heard of that game because one of my students it was making his honors doctorate, his honors thesis was about Japanese learning games, and and I do know games that can be used for Chinese. However, they tend to be more on the educational side than the fun side. And there's a lot of apps. So, for example, Duolingo is one that's quite popular here, but it only teaches you certain phrases. So, for example, my friend was using it for Chinese, and it was 我姐姐要喝热水. My older sister wants to drink boiling water. If you don't have an older sister and you would never want to drink boiling water, that's not useful for you to learn. So it's all about language and use. So I think even just MMORPGs are really good for getting in, and you don't have to be vocal to begin with. You can just listen. What's really good about an MMORPG, that kind of thing, is that there's the in-game text. So you can write things, and you can also screenshot or log your text, take it away, and learn from that. So you're learning specific language for use. So I think when we're talking about what games are good for learning, what games do you like to play, and can you play it in another language? So if you want to learn Chinese and you like to play first person shooter, why not have a try in Chinese? So it's all about, there isn't a one size fits all, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true. And well, tying to that previous statement about MMORPGs, I have a question. And I think interactivity is very necessary. I think collaborative activities
Yeah.
between students are really good. So, and I don't think, or no, okay, no. My question is the following. So, what do we need? What kind of games do we need in our classes to bolster this communication willingness in our students?
Yeah.
How can we make them more eager to talk, more eager to communicate one another, and what games can well bring us to that?
That's a great question as well. Um, the problem with introducing it in the classroom, then it has to have a very high educational quality level, and meet the parameters of the education system, unless it's something that was played in the break times. And in that case, it's more about engaging the students in what they're interested in. And like I said before, one size doesn't fit all. A girl may not want to play the same as the girl next to her, or a boy, or whoever. Everyone has different tastes. But I think as an educator, then to put a set list of tasks or parameters, that's where something like Minecraft is quite good, because you can set it up to be more orientated towards a particular gender or style or type of play, and task. But collaboration is the most important. So whether it's team based work within a classroom, you're all going to complete this task in English in Minecraft, or, and this is even more prescient now because we're in this age where everyone is around the world, but we're all still communicating on computer. Practice with people in another country. Um, if you can get connections, for example, with a school in China, or anywhere in the world, and you can have an online safe gaming experience, then that is definitely the thing to go for, because we can teach language, but we can't teach impulsive conversational language. It's a completely different thing. I can, yeah, hello. So I went to a school in China, and I stood up in front of 150 students and said, "Hello, how are you?" 150 students. "I'm fine, thank you. And you?" No emotion. They didn't care if I was okay. It was just rote repetition. So if you said to them, "Nah, I'm all right," they wouldn't know what to do, because it's the rote repetition of learning. And I think that's really important with collaborative language, that it's language for use. And think about the games you play, and is there a way that you can adapt that? Or watch streams of people. Obviously, as a teacher, you're going to have to watch it first to make sure that it's PC friendly and suitable for
Yeah.
children. Everyone loves to watch someone else play a game as well. And you'll also be picking up the language that you would need if you want to go into that game and play. Um, Often the language that's used in these sort of streams and in gameplay is modern, current language. It's not textbook language. It's how people actually speak, and how younger people actually speak to each other. The language that I use now, probably children in 10, 12 years old are using a different style of English from me. So it's current, and it's the best way to learn, I think. Language in use always.
Okay, well, in your experience on in your investigation, is it mandatory that we need the use of an avatar to improve the experience of this gamer learner?
No, I don't think it's necessary to use an avatar, but it depends on the type of game. It's very seldom that people will pick an avatar that is really representative of themselves. Um, People tend to pick, so in an MMORPG, people would pick a character that represents the characteristics they would want to have in the game. So what they pick, the strong guy or the clever guy. Um, in my research, some of the characters had said that, sorry, some of the participants had said that they would pick the most beautiful girl so that more men are likely to help them in their daily tasks because they would be entranced by them. But there's a lot of games that we've played that don't even use avatars. If you think about your physics games, Flappy Bird, uh, your Angry Birds, all of these, you don't need an avatar. But I think when using an avatar, there's a concept called face, which is how people view you and people's perception of you is often seen as more important than the actual truth. So if I go into a Spanish speaking role playing game and I don't want to be obviously not a non Spanish person, I might pick a neutral name or a name that sounds maybe a little Spanish. And I might pick an avatar that looks more culturally representative of the language that I'm wanting and culture that I'm wanting to join. It's also
I'm definitely guilty about using female avatars in MMOs. We have a relevant question, I think, to this topic from Natalie, and it says, "What do you think about VR char as a way to combine that conversational part and the avatar connection? Is that a safe experience for kids?"
right. As soon as you say, "Is it a safe experience for kids?" there isn't any guarantees. You can't. There's always. I think when you're allowing children to use this kind of thing, it should always be trusted and monitored. You know, VR chat. Yeah, I mean, there's VR chat, the new chatting app which you set up. It's almost like Second Life, and you can go in and create. I think there is curated experiences as well, so they can set age parameters and limits, and it is monitored, which is useful. And again, if you're taking that step out with your natural fear and you're going into a realistic yet imaginary experience representing as someone else, then you're going to be more willing to communicate. And it is the sense of immersion, but also the sense of an impermanence. So if I go into your game world, and you're all speaking Spanish, and I've got my native or culturally representative avatar, and I go into your world, and then I say something which is a really big mistake, well, I can leave, get a new avatar, and come back in, or actually just come back in, and it'll be new people. Whereas if I did it face to face, I would feel far more embarrassed for making a language mistake. And so this sort of adds a degree of impermanence and not a lack of responsibility, but it can help you feel like you're not worried as much. You're immersed. And I think the VR chat function, the application is really good for that, because children can play and they can create their own worlds, and with the monitoring of it is a really good thing. Um, but anything that can get people talking, and on the understanding that in the role-playing game, for example, there's often characters that don't have perfect English or perfect language or make mistakes, and this is normal. Nobody has perfect language, and you shouldn't try for that, because I make mistakes all the time when I speak English, and I'm fluent. So why should you be perfect in English? Because I'm not. But yeah.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. VRChat is a very interesting tool. Minecraft educational like edition is also
Hmm.
something that is really important, especially because teachers don't have to worry about how to get people connected, because well, the game already has that done for you. I think that language classes normally are more gamified than your normal classes. Like
Hmm.
traditionally, English learning or language learning has revolved around playing games and
Role playing.
watching movies and these different kinds of activities. Let's say, for example, on your study on gamification paper, when you talk about this game about Save the Turtle, which
Mm.
is a series of questions, but you have interactive feedback, you have pictures, you have like these different visually attractive elements to learning, and I think that's also really interesting about language learning. Do you think this like simple gamification solutions, this let's add some drawings, let's add some color, can work in other subjects apart from language learning?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of gamification is almost just to add competition, and that's what gets people excited. So, if we have a maths class, and I teach you, well, I'm not going to teach you maths, but someone teaches you maths, and you get, well done at the end of it. That's not much fun, but whoever finishes the question first gets a lollipop, or gets a sticker, or gets moved up the chart. And so there's a lot of, particularly in primary school, a lot of this gamification takes place already without it being called gamification. Um, and I think you can turn anything into a game if you try hard enough, and that's part of it. But I think, from my point of view, so why I talk about role playing games and language, it's to enhance language learning. I'm not saying that you should play a role playing game to learn a new language. You can, and people have done it, but it is really hard, and you have to try really hard, and you have to work at it. Whereas it can enhance what you've learned in the classroom. And I think if that's what teachers can hack into, so what they've taught in the classroom, can the kids go off and play a game that utilizes elements of that? And that way they will feel there's a value. And that's a really important thing. Why am I learning this? How can I use it? I've never, I mean, I did maths at school very badly. And we did Pythagoras and the sides of a triangle. As an adult, as a 44-year-old adult, I've never needed to know how long one side of a triangle is. It's not ever been useful for me, but language has and culture has. And so how can you adapt these things to put them into a game so the children can see a value and a purpose and a use?
Okay,
I
that
love it. We have a YouTube question, but I also have like another question. Maybe we could go around that before, because you also have investigation about avatars and how they use the avatars, and we just said that when you commit like a typo or you're mistaken in another language that is not yours and you're using an avatar, you won't feel as guilty as you usually feel if it's going to be like face to face. But what happened on the other side? Like if we're in the virtual reality chat and I in my avatar suit hear you said something in Spanish wrong. I'm going to judge you more or I'm going to judge you less because you're in your avatar suit.
I think this is when we get into the sticky area of like trolling. There's always going to be that kind of person who just wants to make other people feel bad or laugh at them, that kind of thing. Um, but I think there's a general understanding between most people that enter these games that how do I feel and how does someone else feel? So if you make a mistake, a correction is probably okay. But you tend to think like if I corrected a small mistake and every small mistake you make, I keep correcting you, that's not supportive. If it was a big mistake, then yeah, I think that would be fine. But again, if you're an avatar and you're faceless, you're not necessarily affected as much by what someone says to your avatar as opposed to what someone would say to you. And that's a big difference.
Although I think that can spark maybe a discussion or a debate about what kind of avatars do we want our learners to have. Because if we are in immersive games, and if the person feels too identified with their avatar, then the
Mm,
shyness will appear again. Because I will perceive the avatar as myself, and then
yeah.
I will have the same fear to losing face. Whereas if I'm using maybe a predetermined avatar or a generic avatar, it will be less of an issue.
Yeah, and that's part of the whole willingness to communicate and the sort of the other side of the Proteus effect that if I'm not, I have an avatar that isn't representative of me, either my gender or my culture or my race or whatever, and I know I'm lying by using that avatar. When I see your avatar, will I judge your avatar based on how honest I've been? And that can have implications as well. But there's also this point of, so for example, in my game, based on the research from the avatars, as the player progresses, they start off with the NPCs who are the avatars that they would most like to interact with. But as the language gets more difficult, the avatars or the NPCs change in, well, become the NPCs that they were less comfortable interacting with. So we're constantly pushing you out of your comfort zone, and I think that's really important. We've been in language classes where we'll speak to each other in the language, and we'll speak to the teacher in the target language. If you put a native speaker in front of you, you'd be, oh, no, I don't want to speak because I might make a mistake. But you were just speaking to other people with no problem. Um, so I think the choice of the avatar is, I only touched on the surface of it, and it's such an interesting topic for me. But it's only a small part of the bigger PhD, but it's definitely something I will be revisiting with a much wider audience. Um, and ideally, because those are the avatars I showed, they're ones that I designed myself. I would have like an avatar creation where you can pick the eyes, the mouth, the skin color, the hairstyle, and then that would be more telling than just 16 choices.
We have a question here in chat, uh, once again from Natalie, and it's, what do you think it's the best way to combine different types of players for learning? I'm talking about achiever, socializer, explorer. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those terms, but those are the kinds of players.
Okay. That's a very good question, Natalie, but it's also a very difficult one to answer. I think the personality types are always going to be really important. But if you're talking about a team dynamic, it would be the same team dynamic that would work in, so for example, esports. So it would be the same team dynamic that would work in an actual team. When you are talking about the kind of personality types, so if someone's more sociable, if someone's more wanting to try things more, someone's wanting to get the achievements, it's a very it's a very difficult one to answer. It I think honestly it's more important that it's someone you feel comfortable talking to. And at first, when you're trying to play a game in another language, you're probably just going to sit there and watch and listen. And the utterances, the comments you make, they tend to be quite minimal until confidence builds up, until you get an ear for how people are saying what they're saying. And at that point, um, then you can start to play more of an active role and then choose who to interact with. So I think at first being comfortable is the most important thing. Joining with friends as well is not a bad thing as long as you don't resort to using your own language because it's easy. And that's part of the problem. It's sometimes better just to jump in feet first on your own and just give things a try.
One thing I could say about those different of players is that I think it naturally comes that the socializer is the most easy to develop for because he will naturally do the activity you want. But for the other ones, you are a bit forced to diversify your mechanics probably. So you make some kind of mini game or activity that the achiever would like to complete, and maybe he's not that interested in talking with a group of people.
Yeah, I mean the whole point of using learning or enhancing language in games is that it's done in small, manageable steps anyway. So there should be something for everyone. That in terms of role playing games, then all of these aspects are covered. That so in my one, when you've answered questions, you reach a certain level, you get a piece of a shield. At the end of that level, you would achieve the whole shield. You can explore. You could spend a long time just wandering around. Not everyone wants to do that. Some people are just far more goal orientated, want to get on and want to get that shield, want to get that tick, that validation of learning. The social aspect, I think, in terms of language learning, the social part for most people is something that would come gradually because it is really nerve wracking to just jump in and start going, hi, now I'm going to speak Spanish to you, or I'm going to speak Chinese. And you want to get an idea of where you are and how the game is played and how people talk to each other first. A bit of prep. I think, yeah, in terms of a game, you should always cover all of these aspects anyway. Um, and I think that you should allow the autonomy for a player or a learner to choose their own path, what they want to do, and in what manner they want to play that game. You know, I'm the person that wanders. I play survival horrors. I go into every room, every door, round and round, looking at everything first. Whereas I have a friend who just straight to the target. So it's entirely dependent on the person, but there should be that opportunity for everyone.
And I think doing that, maybe reading lore. I had the experience of learning a lot of English from doing just that, from reading lore or reading conversations with NPCs. A lot of what I learned for English was just in games,
Yeah.
doing story based games.
No, exactly, and I think that's part of it. And even with games that utilize in-game chat, you can record it, you can listen back to it. If you didn't understand a word, you could, even with the text chat, you can write that word down. You can learn it so that next time you're in the game, you know that phrase, right? And so it's almost an organic way of learning, but it's so autonomous. It's learner driven. You know, the student will be given a certain task. For example, a teacher gives them a task to use this language in a game, but how they use it and how much further beyond that they go is entirely up to them. And we've all played games. We sat down to play a game, and then we look up and it's nighttime because we've just been in that game world. And that's where I don't think anyone's ever done that whilst, memorizing grammar. You can't, you're counting the minutes down until that's done. So it's that kind of environment where the immersion is so important.
Oh, this is too epic. So, well, I believe that Sarah has a question now.
No, I was just gonna contribute to the conversation. I think, yeah, that there are some like small snippets of dialogue that are
Mm-hmm.
very repetitive in games, and those are what sticks to the player's minds. So on the top of my head, I can think about the "Hey, listen" from Navi in The Legend of Zelda. So there's someone telling you all the time, "Hey, listen! Hey, listen! Hey,
Mm-hmm.
listen!" Eventually, you're gonna learn that,
Yeah.
right? Even if you're playing for an
Yeah.
entirely different reason.
exactly. And when I first moved to China, I didn't speak Chinese. I only spoke English, and so you start to hear the words being repeated again. So if I give something to someone and they say "shit," then oh, that must mean thank you.
That's thank yeah, thank
You
you.
start to pick it up, and the more you pick it up, the more your confidence grows, and the more your confidence grows, the more able you are and willing you are to use the language. And this is again the same thing in a game, that you start to listen, you start to hear certain words and phrases, um, then you might feel comfortable using them, and the more you and it sort of snowballs. And that's the really lovely thing about language, that it's for communication. It's never supposed to be perfect,
Yeah.
and there's new words and it's constantly evolving. And if you're in a game and you're playing with, your peers, you're going to be learning the language of your peers, but from another country, as opposed to a textbook which was written 20 years ago. It's not the same thing. And that's when you come back to the "I'm fine, thank you, and you," because that's not how people speak, but that's Queen's English. Yeah, right, exactly. And so building up this confidence within gameplay, or even just on watching streams, like live streams, you're finding you're picking up this language, and it's stuff that you can then use. And also in conversations with your friends, it's cool language. It's stuff that you're willing to use and want to learn, because then it becomes the slang that you're using. So it's a really powerful tool, but almost that language is, you're almost learning it by absorption. It's like you're not actually formally learning it, you're just soaking it up, and that's the best way to learn a language.
I have a question, perhaps from a topic earlier in your presentation. I have seen that people that have non-traditional roles in game development, like story writing or localization, perhaps,
Mhm.
have a difficulty like thinking what could they do with games, or perhaps that they don't even come up with something they could do. So, could you talk a little bit about your role as a localizer in
Yes.
those games?
So localization is an interesting one, because we can say there's two types of localization. So there's domestication and foreignization. So domestication means I have a game from China and I want to sell it in Colombia, and so I'm going to change the language, the culture, catchphrases, maybe some buildings, the way the NPCs are dressed, and I'll make that so that when you play that game, you feel that this is exactly made for you, even though it's the same game. Foreignization is that I send you the game, but I've changed the language, but the cultural aspects of the original game are exactly the same. So something like The Witcher did this really well. Um, their localization team was fantastic. The way they worked, and so The Witcher, they did go through and domesticate that game from Polish to English, and then they foreignized it so that people would have the experience. But for the English market, it is domesticated, in that the accents were changed to be representative of the UK accents, the place names, the certain phrases that were used were changed. Um, but not everything translates. That's part of the issue. So um, a joke that's really funny in your language, if you translated it to English, it might not be funny at all. So there's a joke in Chinese, 如果有一个企鹅放在冰箱里面，为什么它没有事了？因为它是企鹅。 So if I put a goose in a freezer, why doesn't it die? Because it's a penguin. Now in English, that's not funny at all. But in Chinese, it's a play on words, it's a pun. So you have to be culturally aware of these sort of in jokes or slang. Pop culture, in particular, is something that doesn't always translate. Um, But more than that, every country has different rules for what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. If you want to sell a game in Japan, you might have to be more careful about blood and guts, but less careful about scantily clad women. Whereas the reverse is true in the UK. You know, blood and guts aren't so much of a big deal, but women must be wearing clothes within a game for the rating system that we have. And so with localization, that often people think it's the last thing you should do, but when you're designing a game or putting a game through development, it's actually perhaps one of the things you should do first or at the same time. Because if you're wanting to make an international game or a game that will sell internationally, you should already be thinking about how will this translate to another country? Is there something in my design that is fine for us, but potentially offensive to another culture? And this is, yeah, it's a really involved, really interesting job. Narrative as well. Now you can talk about localization of narrative in that are you going to make the story so for example Three Kingdoms is a very big popular story in China. It doesn't translate necessarily over here. And the same Kingdoms of Camelot was a game that came out over here, UK, America, but the story of King Arthur and Camelot isn't well known in China, so they changed the narrative, the storytelling, to match the culture. So they localized it from that perspective. It's, yeah, so many things you can localize.
Do you
I
think that
feel,
maybe
oh, sorry. Do you want to? I feel like the work of the translators are always like devalued because you receive the game or the book or whatever you're consuming, the cultural product that you're consuming, and you never thought about the work of that cultural translation. And that's why I do believe and I do support the language translation, like when you see the Disney movie in Spanish or whatever movie you see in the local language, and it is a good translation that you can see also the acting, the drama, but also you can understand the cultural jokes in that movie. Like that is a piece of art. Value
Absolutely.
it.
And you know the time, the moment you know that you really understand another language is when you have a dream in that language. I remember having my first Chinese dream and waking up going like, "Wow, this is amazing." It was a very boring dream, but it still showed me that my brain was thinking in another language. But with localization, it's more than translation. You can just translate things, but they won't necessarily work for another language or another culture. Um, you need to sort of look at the characters, the narrative, the artwork. Do certain colors have more significance in other cultures? So there's a lot that comes into play with localization.
yeah, I was gonna ask if you think that maybe uh, not doing localization might actually have a positive. And I have an example in question. I've been playing a game called Xenoblade 2,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually has a Scottish voice actors, which for
Uh-huh.
me is very strange. I rarely interact with the Scottish accent, but I got used to it. So
That's yeah. I mean, I think that's part of what is great about games, and that you get to hear all of these different voices and accents, particularly if they're like real people's voices and accents as opposed to, you know, someone putting on a fake accent. But it gives you a taster, absolutely. And I think if there's a big problem. So, for example, talking English, there's a big problem with people thinking that there's one standard of English. There isn't a standard English accent, it doesn't exist. Um, Even in England, there's so many different accents. Each accent has its own words, its own terms. You know, I'm from a very small country, but we all have our own accents, our own languages within where we live. And I think exposure to that is wonderful, in particular coming from the perspective of a small country where we do have some of our own languages. It's really important to preserve these languages. So after my PhD, one thing I'm wanting to do is to go on and do the same game, but use it for Gaelic, which is Scottish national language, because it's my culture. And if you don't use the language, it dies. And I can't think of anything sadder than that. And it's the same thing. If you're being exposed to it, if you're hearing it within a game, then of course you're going to be picking it up. We have Gaelic television. You can sit and watch it, and you start to hear words. Okay, that must mean hello. That must mean thank you. That means black coffee. You pick up the important words, and yeah, I mean, I think the Scottish accent's a wonderful thing. I think everyone should hear it.
And I have an experience that now that you think, I've never think about that. Like, I was applying to a job for the British Consul, and they asked me, like, do you have this type of accent? Like, you have the United States English, and like it is just like it is going to be the same paint color and nothing else, and you don't see all the colors around an accent. Like in Spanish, we have just in Colombia we have a lot of accents in our region. Like you can see if this person is from Bogota, or if it's from Pasto, or if it's from the Costa Caribe of our country. So like we should also like appreciate that type of cultural identity. And you were worried at the first that maybe we weren't going to understand your English, and we do understand your English. So
yeah, I mean, this is.
Do you have to impose your voice too?
Hmm?
Do you have to impose your voice to talk with us?
Because I lived in China for 8 years, and so I had to make my accent more neutral. And so this is the effect. I'm not nearly as broad as with Scottish accent as I used to be.
How it's supposed to hear a Scottish accent?
The Scottish accent it's a beautiful accent. So we speak Doric in the northeast of Scotland. So like I felt like is hello. I felt like Nibad Chavanawa, who's your due. So there's a lot of words that don't sound like English, and they're not necessarily English, but there are local language, and it is about preserving this. And so even a small country like Scotland, there's so many different accents that we can hear, and we can understand that, oh, you must be from Glasgow, or you're from the islands, or you're from here, or you're from Aberdeen. And so it is about that. And that's something that The Witcher did really, really well. Um, the localization of accents for The Witcher in English was astounding. So much work went into that. And I think games should do that. You should be able to, not expect it to be a standardized accent, because, like you said, it just doesn't exist. No one has it. I mean, no one speaks the Queen's English. I doubt the Queen even does, because it's just textbook language.
Yeah, and actually, I think accents have become more of a cultural stamp, maybe, and that's why they are being more widely used in localization, maybe to give the idea of a southerner, of a northerner. Uh, Maybe
Yes,
this wasn't the case in the past, but with globalization, accents have become a way to tell people who you are and where you're from and what your culture is.
it's also something that in the past your accent could be a thing of pride or a thing of shame. Do you speak like a working class person? Do you speak like a rich person? Do you speak like you've been to university? Now I think it's much more fluid, and I think we're more able to embrace where we come from, because everyone can go to university, everyone can learn. the way you speak doesn't mean that you're more clever than someone else. It's not always about using big words and complicated grammar. Sometimes it's actually just about communicating an idea and that idea being good. And I think that's part of it. But yeah, your cultural identity, I think in a world where we can be connected to anyone, anywhere, our cultural identities are really important. It's something we should be proud of, and we should embrace our cultures as much as we embrace everyone else's. And I think that's what's wonderful about the world we live in, that we can be in such close communication as we are now, speaking the same language. And even if we didn't speak the same language, there's technology that can help us. Although you should learn language, you shouldn't just rely on translators.
We have third round, Natalie. She asks,
Our last question.
what is the hardest part of learning a language, and how do you overcome that? For me, it is grammar. How can you make it funny, or
Yeah,
to learn grammar, for
grammar
instance?
sucks. It's boring. Learn Chinese. Chinese grammar is so easy. Um, you know what? The hardest part of learning a language is the being able to put that language into use, having the forum to be able to put the language into use, but also being brave enough to be, to take that first step and stand up and use that target language. That's a really difficult thing to do because, we're so used to being able to speak and express ourselves fully that you almost feel that you're going to be using children's language as an adult and you're going to be judged for that. And I think one of the most important things is to take that pressure off yourself. To be honest, when, being in China, people are just happy that you're trying to use their language. Last year, I was in Peru for a conference, and my Spanish is terrible. I can understand it because I lived in Italy for a year, but I can't speak Italian either. The grammar is too complicated. But I would try and speak Spanish to get what I wanted in Peru. Nobody laughed at me. Nobody called me stupid or thought that I was like a child. They were just really happy that I was trying to engage with them in their language because it shows a respect. Um, how to learn grammar in a fun way? Depends on the language. Play games, obviously. um, Pick it up not by rote repetition. Don't read grammar books page from front to end. Don't read dictionaries from front to end. It's boring. It's not useful. But watch games, watch live streams, and pick up on the way grammar is being used. How did you learn your native language? You didn't learn it from a book. You learned Spanish by listening to your parents speak. And it's the same. That's how we learn language. We listen and we compute in our heads and we repeat. Books and teaching, yes, is very important. But find something you're interested in that language and follow it that way. You will start to notice. So he's talking about yesterday. So now he's using that tense. I mean, I'm not suggesting that for Italian or Spanish because your grammar is so difficult. But Chinese, definitely. There's no tenses. There's no plurals. It's really the best language to learn.
Yeah, I think in Latin America we are really open with people that speak foreign languages and they try to learn Spanish. We feel very flattered. I think they also do that in Japan.
Every country I've been to has been the same. If you're trying to use their language, they embrace it because it's a sign of respect, and also it shows that you're wanting to interact. And you're not so arrogant that just because you're in someone else's country, they should speak your language. You're the foreigner, you're the tourist, and it's part of the excitement of going to another country is learning part of the language and learning, you know, having a few drinks with people and getting to chat and learn phrases and learn all of the swear words and all of that kind of thing. It's really important. And I think, so for Natalie, I would say that the hardest part is letting go of your inhibition. I don't know how old you are, Natalie, but most people, you will find that the language you can speak normally in your second language, your target language, compared to how well you speak that language when you're in a bar and you've had a couple of drinks, you speak much better because you've got no inhibitions. You don't care so much. Now, I'm not saying have a drink and then try and, but think about letting go of your inhibitions. No one's expecting you to be perfect. So let go of that fear. That's the most important thing. And practice. Use your language as much as you possibly can.
Well, thank you very much, Charly. This was a really awesome experience for us. This is our first English chat for the Women Game Jam pre-jam talks that we've been preparing. So remember that we're going to have another conversations now. But for now that we're closing, like we're going to make a little bit of resume here for our Spanish speakers. So team, let me know, ¿cómo les fue? ¿Qué tal la invitada que tuvimos hoy? Increíble, me encanta muchísimo Charly.
Pues sí, claro, o sea, realmente como que el trabajo que hace Charly es lo que yo estoy haciendo, es lo que más me apasiona, entonces, pues obvio, o sea, tener como esta persona de la que antes solo había leído papers y había citado en mis
Qué amor,
trabajos,
¿no?
pues
O sea, creo que eso es cuando uno dice como que todo se está alineando definitivamente. Para los que nos están viendo hasta acá, ya vamos a publicar esto en todas nuestras redes, entonces si se perdieron la charla la van a poder repetir. Recuerden claramente que nosotros tenemos el Women Game Jam aquí a la vuelta de la esquina, el próximo 21 al 30 de agosto. Las inscripciones se cierran ya mismo, entonces apúrense, pueden entrar a www.womengamejam.org y ahí justamente pues podrán estar inscribiéndose para participar. Es una hackathon, una maratón de desarrollo que fomenta la participación de las mujeres. ¿Algo que quisieran hablar antes de que cerráramos nuestro stream?
Pues no, de pronto agradecerle a Charly. Aquí como dato curioso, el primer juego que jugué en la vida fue Tales of Pirates 2.
¡Oh, qué lindo!
Para el que Charly hizo localización. Me pareció como muy bonito. El primer juego que jugué en la vida fue ese.
Qué lindo. ¿Y tú, Andrés?
Sí, yo para responder tu pregunta anterior, no, a mí me encanta hacer estas charlas. Es casi lo más cercano a viajar que uno puede tener, es hablar con gente con pues vidas muy diferentes a la de uno. Entonces uno puede aprender mucho de eso, ¿no?
Uh-huh. Bueno, para todos los que nos están preguntando cómo viene nuestra agenda, hoy a la 1 de la tarde vamos a hablar con Mariana Botero, que nos tiene preparada una charla de Game Audio a la colombiana. Después, a las 4 de la tarde, vamos a estar con Daniel Sánchez, que nos va a dar un Unity 101. Mañana, el viernes, en nuestro stream de los viernes con la Caverna del Gecko, vamos a estar hablando con M. Halberstam. Mi alemán no es muy bueno. Antes de eso, Daniel Sánchez da una conferencia de accesibilidad y a las 6 de la tarde volvemos entonces con Jimmy Rodríguez. El sábado vamos a estar con Silvia Ullogue, que nos va a hablar de una guía para artistas y así sobrevivirás a tu primer Game Jam. Y pues estamos en confirmación de otras charlas. Entonces tenemos una semana llena de contenido, tenemos una semana con muchísimas cosas por hacer. Recuérdense, pues, tener todo súper conectado. Estamos en YouTube, estamos en Twitch, estamos en Facebook, aquí streameando todo el tiempo y hablando con ustedes para que se fomente este tema de desarrollo de videojuegos. ¿Algo más para agregar, equipo?
No, de pronto despedirnos un poco de Charly ahora.
No, pues ya, sí, pero bueno, nos despedimos del stream primero. Muchísimas gracias a todos los que nos están viendo. Besos enormes y nos seguimos viendo en una siguiente transmisión. Nos vemos a la una. Chao.
Chao.